everyone. This is Kathy, and welcome back to Kathy's Happy Home and another Sunday Praise. We're continuing in our study on the book of Esther, and we're up to chapter 2 today. Let me begin by reading verses 1 to 4. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So this is broader than just the events of the previous chapter. Verse 16 of Esther 2 indicates that there was a 4-year span between chapters 1 and 2 of this book. And during that time is when King Ahasuerus made his battle against Greece and suffered a horrifying defeat. He came home a defeated man, and he wanted to cheer his heart through sexual diversions. So the plan was to assemble a harem from the most beautiful women of the land, to bring them into a harem for the king and to choose the most favored woman from that group to become his new queen. It was sort of a Miss Persian Empire contest, and the winner, of course, would take Vashti's place. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus says that Ahasuerus had a total of 400 women selected. Now, these women didn't have a choice on whether they wanted to go or not. They were just taken, and that was it. So let's go on to verses 5 to 7. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So Mordecai is the cousin of Esther, and he came to Persia in one of the waves of resettlement that the Babylonians had imposed on Judah when it conquered the land of Judah. Esther, whose Jewish name Hadassah means myrtle, the Persian name means Esther or star, was raised by her cousin Mordecai after the death of her father and mother. They were part of a large Jewish community. They weren't the only ones living there. There was a lot of Jewish people there, and when Ezra was allowed to go back to rebuild Jerusalem, they didn't go with him. They stayed. And in the day, the reason was in the day of Mordecai and Esther, Judah, the land of Judah was considered a very wild place, a backward place. It would be like going out in the sticks, and they were living in the capital city, and they were used to certain things. The Bible tells the Hebrew for lovely and beautiful in this verse is literally beautiful in form and lovely to look at it. And we know from that the Bible doesn't lie, and we know that Esther was very beautiful. Verse 8. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. It seems that Esther really didn't have a choice about this. Haggai was the king's eunuch, a man entrusted with the oversight of the king's harem for obvious reasons. And he was noted in history by Herodias as being an officer of King Ahasuerus. So verse 9. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther obtained favor with Haggai, the man in authority over her, and in this, her godliness ensured a fulfillment of Proverbs 3:3 and 4, which says, "Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and men." She was a godly woman, and it must have shown because she was highly favored. Because of this favor, Haggai gave Esther special beauty preparations beyond her allowance, and he also gave her 7 choice maidservants to look after her beauty needs. Esther was beautiful to begin with, and now she looked like one of those after pictures from the glamour photo studios, and she looked that way all the time. So verses 10 and 11, Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the core of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So we see Mordecai was still very concerned with what was going on with his charge. And normally there's not a good reason for hiding the fact that we're Christians. Far too many Christians act as if they're secret agents, and they always conceal who they are in the Lord. But Jesus gave us a warning in Matthew 10:32 and 33, that whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. We can't live a life of denial and expect God to recognize us. But we do realize that there are situations in which God may have us be a little reticent about our Christian identity, not for the purposes of permanently concealing it, but waiting for an opportune moment to reveal it. And apparently this is what Mordecai was sensing was the right thing to do in this circumstance, and Esther agreed. But every day Mordecai paced in front of the core of women, trying to find out what was going on. And it showed that his great love for her and his concern for her in a potentially dangerous place. In verses 12 to 14, it says, "Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to the regulations for the women. For thus were the days of their preparation appointed: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shagzah, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name." So Persia was one of the many countries that was famous for its perfumes and cosmetics. And they did such things as ritualistic baths and plucking the eyebrows and painting the hands and feet with henna, facial makeup, applications of a beautifying paste all over the body that was to lighten the color of the skin and remove spots and blemishes. And one of the reasons for a lengthy time of preparation was to tell if the women had been pregnant upon coming into the harem, so that the king wouldn't be charged with fathering a child that wasn't really his. And Matthew Poole tells us that the oils and perfumes were necessary because the bodies of men and women in those hot countries did of themselves yield very ill sense, if not corrected and qualified by art. You get the gist of what's going on. So this sounds wonderful, a year of constant spa treatments, but the destiny of these women should also be considered. One evening with the king. If he chose them from 400 others to be his queen, then she would be his companion until She displeased him, and for the 399 who lost, they were banished to the harem, where they stayed the wife or concubine of the king, but rarely, if ever, saw him afterwards. And they were never free to marry another man, and they were living as perpetual widows and probably slaves. So Esther in verses 15 and to 18 is selected to be the queen. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. Now Esther had wisdom, and she showed that in the way that she trusted Haggai to give her just the right thing to take into the king, and she didn't want anything fancy or something that was inappropriate. She gained the sight of all who saw her because of her godliness and her beauty. Beauty often gains people, especially women, favor with others. And but the thing is that we shouldn't rely on what we look like to show who we really are. And so Esther was selected to be the queen of King Ahasuerus. Esther's life so far has been remarkable, hasn't it? She was the child of Jewish exiles who both died. She was raised by her cousin in a foreign and often hostile land. She was taken by compulsion into the king's harem. She found favor with all she met, and she was finally selected to be queen of the realm. This wasn't just an accident that all of these things happened to her. It wasn't just because of luck or fortune or her good looks or her good personality. God had a plan, and Esther is part of it. In exactly the same way, God has a plan for our lives. Wherever you are at right now, God has a purpose for it. Maybe a short purpose, maybe a long one, maybe a large purpose, or maybe a small one. But God has a reason for where you are and what is going on. To this point, the story of Esther also shows us that in the outworking of his plan, God can use the evil of man. God did not make Ahasuerus drunk or make him demand that his queen present herself in an immodest way before the lords of the kingdom. Yet God allowed this wicked action of man to fulfill a purpose in his greater plan. We find assurance in the truth that no other person, no matter how evil they are, can defeat God's plan for our life, no matter what they have done to you or will do to you. So now let's go on to verses 19 and 20. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. So the fact that Mordecai is sitting in the gate to the city shows that he was associated with decision makers and influence in the kingdom. This was a high position he had. And some have thought that the book of Esther carries this idea of concealment too far. This book has been criticized because it doesn't mention the name of God. Some say God was left out of the book of Esther because of its use in the festivities surrounding Purim, where people commonly became drunk. And one rabbi taught a man is obligated to drink on Purim until he is unable to distinguish between blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman. And some have wondered if in that atmosphere it would be too easy to profane the name of God. Others see the name of God written in hidden acrostics, and perhaps the book of Esther does not contain the name of God because it was written under Persian rule and for distribution in the Persian Empire. But most likely the book of Esther doesn't have the name of God because it shows how God works behind the scenes. God is always active in the book of Esther, even if his name isn't written out in it. Okay, and let's end this chapter with verses 21 to 23. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Mordecai's attitude wasn't, I'm a Jewish man in exile under a pagan king, so I don't care if he's killed. Instead, he feared God and honored the king, just as Peter tells us in 1 Peter 2:17. So this threat of assassination was real, as Ahasuerus was eventually murdered by his prime minister and replaced by Artaxerxes. And the word gallows isn't like what we think of in the Old West, the gallows, the rope around the neck and all. It was literally impalement on a stake, much like the crucifixion. Most horrible, horrible way to die. So that's where we're going to end today, at the end of verse 2. But let's see how this applies to our life today. We see in this chapter a powerful truth that can help us work through anxiety and help us succeed in Jesus' instructions not to worry about the future. God prepares the solution before the problem even exists. What we find out is that Esther ascended to the throne as a major part of the solution of the trouble that's going to happen later in this book. God already had his woman in place to resolve the issue before it even happened. This pre-problem solving on God's part is not unique to this story. In fact, we see it most clearly in the whole Bible. Jesus was the prepared solution for the world's sin problem before the world was even created. That's where I'm going to end for today. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Be sure to tune in for more of Kathy's Happy Home this week on Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching. See you later.